Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late. And we will start with comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda.
Alex, I think they're the white lights, the white buttons. It would be great if we could get that other bank of light on.
Yes, sir,
There
go
you
ahead.
Thanks.
Do we need on the speaker?
Oh, you can come up and sit here
Yes,
if you want.
yeah.
Yep.
My name is James Lease, and I live in South Burlington. And recently, have seen remarkable public outrage and remarks from our congressional delegation opposing the large-scale government-sponsored child abuse at the border with Mexico. And perhaps this is a good time to consider the large-scale government-sponsored child abuse occurring right here in South Burlington. The United States Air Force describes this large-scale government-sponsored child abuse from the currently based F-16 afterburner that's taking off 2,000 times a year in the Chamberlain School neighborhood. In a section of the environmental impact statement that's entitled Effects on Learning and Cognitive Abilities, the Air Force says chronic exposure to high aircraft noise levels can impair learning, and that tasks involving central processing and language comprehension, such as reading, attention, problem solving, and memory, appear to be the most affected by noise. And the Air Force says that chronic exposure of first and second grade children to aircraft noise can result in reading deficits and impaired speech perception. But this is only part of what the Air Force says. They go on and on for 2.5 pages. And in part because of these facts, the Air Force repeatedly says that homes subjected to such high aircraft noise levels are unsuitable for residential use. They don't want children to be exposed to that, and that's the Air Force. The U.S. Air Force indicates that learning is impaired in two distinct ways. First, chronic or repeated hitting children with blasting from high-noise military aircraft while they're at home, outdoors, or in school has its effect just by the blasting noise. And second, separate from that, are the daily classroom interruptions of learning in class. So there's two separate things. Now, as to the chronic blasting, the Air Force says that it's currently hitting children in the Chamberlain School neighborhood more than 2,000 times a year, impairing their learning and cognitive development every year they grow up. There's been 10 years of that afterburner since it started in 2008. That's 20,000 hits a 10-year-old child has been exposed to. I ask you to consider that even such an extreme measure as closing Chamberlain School will not be enough to protect the children and their learning from the F-16 afterburner and the F-35, because hundreds of children will still be living in the Chamberlain neighborhood and hit 2,000 times a year as they're at home or playing outside before they even enter kindergarten and throughout their childhood. Of course, even one child abused by the government action is too many. But the U.S. Air Force indicates in its report that over 1,200 children in several towns are living in the extreme noise danger zone and at risk of learning impairment from the F-35. Now, regarding children at the Texas border, Senator Leahy made some brilliant comments. He said that children today would still be forcibly separated from their parents at the border en masse if not for the collective voices of concerned Americans who demanded a change. And that's because, he said, the power in the United States resides with the people. Well, fortunately, at town meeting in Burlington, the voters, the people with the power, adopted a ballot item requesting cancellation of the planned basing of the F-35 and requesting instead low noise level equipment with a proven high safety record that's appropriate for a densely populated area. And the city councils of Burlington, Winooski, and South Burlington accepted what our Constitution calls an instruction from the voters and joined in adopting resolutions making these identical requests. But pressure is still being applied by certain real estate developers and leading politicians to force the F-35 basing on the people anyway. So what is at stake is not just learning and cognitive development and the future lives of our children whose learning will be impaired, but also Vermont town meeting democracy, which we teach in school. And so it's something we should protect. Here is what I ask you to do. Please join the city councils of the 3 cities in sending a letter to the Secretary of the Air Force, adding your voice to the collective voices of the Burlington voters and the city councils of the 3 cities in requesting cancellation of the F-35 and asking that it not be forced on the most densely populated part of Vermont against the will of the people. And let's do more. Let's have assemblies. Let's inform the children and their parents. Let's create a movement to stop the large-scale government-sponsored child abuse now. And let's have all sides participate in such assemblies. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Would you like to leave a copy of your statement?
Sure.
Great. All right. Appreciate that. Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes, sir.
Good evening, Paul Lyon, South Burlington resident. I wanted to ask about the South Burlington High School condom availability protocol, and where does that sit with the school board at this time? I went over to the high school to find out more about it, and they said that there were supposed to be 3 readings of the protocol. I'm just not sure of the process that goes into this particular action before it becomes part of the district policy, and I wanted to get a little clarification on that.
Do we have an update on that, David? Or do you have an update?
I don't have an update on how Patrick and his administrative folks are going to deploy that situation. As far as the 3 readings, I'm not sure where that particularly came from, because it was really an information to the board from me, based on what I thought would be an important thing to share with the board and the public. As far as the implementation and the locations of the distributions, I'm not exactly sure how Patrick is going to do that, but certainly I can update the board, on how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So to be clear, you're saying it's not a board policy.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It is more of an operational matter
That's
at the
correct.
high school, and we were merely informed
That's
of
correct.
what was happening.
Yep.
and
Under
what
the policy
Patrick
governance, I
yes.
felt it was important that it
Yes.
was, could be of enough interest to the public, the board, and so that was, I felt was important to bring it before the board to share to the
So
public.
relative to your question, it's not, the 3 readings you're referring to really only occur when the board is considering a policy change. This was an update on an operational issue, but I guess if there's board consensus, we haven't had an update as a board as to where that stands. So if the board is in agreement, we can ask David to include in the next board meeting an update on that operational policy. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
So we will update that at the August 15th meeting.
Yeah, and if I might, just a little further amplification on that, it may run into some headwinds with respect to the population once people become aware of the ramifications of the protocol, and that close in age, The close-in age application with respect to Vermont law will be circumvented by this particular protocol, in that children ages 12 to 15 could be exposed to sexual exploitation, and they're outside of the close-in age limitation that is stipulated in Vermont law, which covers 16 years to 19 years old. I'm concerned that the protocol might also lead to sexual bullying between teens, pressuring preteens and/or peers to engage in sexual activity with themselves because they have the condoms in their possession. And so the accessibility of this could also potentially lead to a view of tacit endorsement of sexual activities between 12-year-olds. So I would like to bring that to the board's attention, that these could be possible outcomes with respect to this particular protocol, even though it's not a board action. It's an administrative action by the high school. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. And do you have any written comments you'd like to leave with the board?
I could make copies of this, if that's okay. It's just handwritten notes. But if you'd like to, I'll make copies of these, and can I send them to you
could
as a?
send one electronically.
Can I send it electronically to you or Mr. Young?
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Young?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to amendments to the agenda.
So we do have a couple amendments. Elizabeth, we need to add, consider a request from the Grand Isle for one additional student. Previously, at June 11th, you approved 6, and the request is for 7. And so I'd like to just add that. I think it would probably make sense under, right after we talk about special education law and grant, and have that as an action item if the board so chooses. And then item 14, we need to modify specific to the lease agreement on item 14 under bids. And we have some corrective language from our attorneys that we need to correct from the last meeting. So there's a total revisement of that. So I'd like to just make note that we'd like to make that modification. And Gary, do you have a specific, any updates on that?
I do. The item should be modified to review and take potential action on the revised resolutions surrounding the equipment leases that were approved on June 6th and June 21st.
And we can go into more detail why that is. There's just some things that were found that we needed to correct, so
Okay.
that's it.
And then we do need to
Executive.
add a brief executive session
Yeah.
after the meeting, because we didn't complete our
Yeah,
agenda.
that's right. Thanks for remembering that.
All right, anything else from the board?
Thanks.
All right, we'll move on to announcements.
So a couple announcements. Market Street, just an FYI, Market Street, obviously, our Rick Marcotte Central School sits on that road, or has access off that road. And we have we've received, actually Gary received some updates from the city, Justin Rabideau, that they're going to have a contractor presence, which means they're just going to start to be more visible starting August 6th, around the corner. We'll have a little impact before the 20th of August. And then starting around August 20th, the 116 end of Market Street, which is again off of Heinsberg Road, will be closed except for local traffic beginning on August 20th. And then the Dorset Street area will be closed once school ends in June at the end of the school year. So there's going to be, there'll be some modified ways to get into the property, et cetera. We'll have to work out those specific details. Gary, did you want to add anything else specific to?
We've rerouted two of the affected routes to enter from the Dorset Street side, and those will be communicated on schedule with no delay to the bus notification.
So will we have bus access off of 116?
We will not.
No.
So we're not considered local
Well,
The local,
Traffic.
the local access does not extend to the length of Market Street. It only goes to the last residence.
Okay.
And then the road will be completely closed
after that, right.
from there forward.
Yeah, thanks for
How-
clarifying, because there's been some new condos, I think, that
Right.
are on the very eastern side of that.
How many of our buses have come in off of 116?
A good number. But remember, we did not have Market Street access, I forget how many years ago it was that we got that. Or probably, I want to say 4 years ago, it opened up in total. And there was some paving that was done and culvert stuff. But in the past years, we've always had access we'd have the access off of Dorset.
Is there any plan for the city or for us to do a communication with parents at Rick Marcotte, just so that they're
Absolutely.
aware? That's going to change
Yeah,
a lot of people's.
We definitely know that. Again,
Schedules.
Gary was just at a meeting and just this, I think, late last week, or was it yesterday? So he's just getting this information, but Brent Kuhn will also be informed. We need to get a whole push out around communication. This is phase one, letting people know through announcements about this. So there is going to be disruption on the Heinsberg Road side. You're not going to be able to access Rick Marcotte property pretty soon. And then the other side is going to get impeded by the end of the school year. The positive thing is once it does open, it will be in a much better, accessibility and the road will be in much better condition, obviously. But there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, et cetera. So
Is there a date that 116 access would open again?
I don't know. Do you know? I don't.
They didn't have a specific date, but the phases of the project are independent, so there's always access to Rick Marcotte.
So the
So-
thinking is when they're closing the Dorset Street side, the
116.
116 side, we don't really know though how far down that would be, right? I mean, so we're gonna have to get more clarity around, how far that will go on either side.
So we don't know how long the Heinsberg entrance will be closed down for, but they wouldn't both be closed at
That's
the same
correct,
time.
right. And we have expressed interest that we don't ever want to be without access into the property, whether that means we've got to go over crushed stone, and to be able to get into our property, et cetera. So, that's important. We don't want to, and we also don't, at this time, want to turn on or have to access through Williston Road either. That's an access that we do have, but it's not a great access point. It's very tight, 90-degree turn, so.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was one announcement. Admin retreat is currently going on tomorrow. The administrators and myself will be there at Killington tomorrow. Many of the administrators are currently at the Vermont Principals Association conference in Killington the last couple of days. And so Gary, myself, Joanne will be going down tomorrow to join the rest of the group. I think that was it. I have done some work with the city around some parking conversations regarding the Rick Marcotte property, and I don't have a lot of details to share, but just working on that as well. A lot of work happening in the schools. I think that's probably a testament. As you walk around, there's a lot happening. Things are out in the hallways. Things are happening with safety and security, et cetera. So that's all I have.
Elizabeth,
Yes.
I've got a question for you. So in our packet, we have the August 15th agenda, which has considered transportation request from Winooski for action. Should we be discussing that tonight?
We'll be discussing that agenda item for the
It's coming up.
15th.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll come up on item 11. And you would get information prior to that, Alex.
Okay.
And it would be consistent with what information has gone out in the past.
Okay.
Specific to that request, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other announcements? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So we haven't had another meeting. We do have one coming up on the 17th. City-school collaboration, I think it's important to say that we are working out some details specific to land conveyance at Rick Marcotte and 575 Dorset Street, and due diligence related to that work, and in preparation for a possible November vote by the public. So that's been a fair amount of collaboration that's been going on with the city, mostly me, a little bit of Gary and some of the other staff in my office, but that's where we currently are. Mhm.
All right, seeing no other comments there, move on to the superintendent's report.
So I've got 3 items, and again, I have that, or 3 items, with one being the addition of the Grand Isle piece. So the first is the addition to safety and security staff. Again, as a result, we built this current budget that we're in now. We built that budget back starting in October, November, December, finalized in January. And again, we've been a district that's tried to be as proactive as we possibly can around safety and security. That said, there was a series of events that happened in our past, both with, I think more recently, in the February timeframe after our budget, or before it went to the voters in March, was the Parkland issue, which definitely, I think, struck a pretty heavy nerve with a lot of our community, but most importantly with our students and staff. As a result of that, we've really looked deeper at, what are the things that we need to be doing, again, due diligence on our part. And so what's before you tonight is to ask for 2 additional school security officers to be at the high school and the middle school to assist us in upgrading our safety and protocols at those schools. These would be, these individuals in total would be 3, because we already have one in the budget. Last year we had 2. We had one that was really there primarily to help with the access from the community library into the high school. That was removed when we knew that the library was going to be moving. But we kept one in the budget. So the request tonight would be for 2 additional school safety officers to work in conjunction with the school resource officers. We have had we've interviewed one candidate, we've interviewed for one position, that one budgeted position. And I know that the school resource officer, more than one, I know Kevin, you were part of that. I know Gary was part of that. And I do know Patrick, and I'm not sure about middle school representation, we're part of that as well. So it's one of those, I feel, needed areas. The students have expressed, particularly at the high school, of a real concern around kind of access into the schools. Obviously, they're first and foremost informed around how they come and go from the school. And so we've really, Patrick and I think a lot of the staff have taken their feedback and really, I think, reevaluated where we are today. So what's before you is 2 additional FTEs. I do have the FTE information. I'll pass that out just to let you know where we're at, because I don't think that's very fair not to talk about it, but not. That's both for them and one for you here. So there is FTE, as I said earlier, in the past, we're at 3.20. Bottom of that first sheet shows you the total summary. 3.20 over with these 2 additions in the budget. Page 2 of that shows you a little bit about where we are with staff and teacher changes. And page 3 of that shows you where we are with financial, where we are with estimated savings. So we are still in the savings category. Yet this would bring us 3.20 over. 2 of those are related to the school resource officer. One of the 3 is related to the contingent teacher, and the 0.20 is related to a myriad of some additions and moving parts there. So again, I don't want to be making a proposal without explaining the exposure, both in FTE and in dollars. So currently we're in a savings area. This would be pushing us over on the FTE area. Again, if we had built the budget starting in February, think you would have found that I would have been proposing school safety officers, at least 2, perhaps more, and to start working on looking at how we're going to do it at the elementary schools. So Gary, I know that you were part of, and I know Kevin, you were part of, and again, I appreciate that. I don't know particularly feedback from you on the appropriateness of these positions as you see it. Kevin's been with us. Kevin's been a school resource officer. How long?
This is my 12th year.
Yeah.
I can,
Yeah, come on up.
So my name is Kevin Grealis. I work for the South Burlington Police Department, and I'm one of our school resource officers. We do have 3, for this upcoming school year, we have 3 school resource officers that'll be serving in the district, and also a supervisor. So comparatively speaking, we have more resource officers than any other school district. Some have 2, some have 1, most have none for Vermont. That being said, our role, our job as school resource officers is to be actively engaged with the kids during the day. So that could be through prevention, through teaching a DARE class in either 5th or 7th grade, or up in the health room at high school, or collaborating with our guidance or school social workers. So we have a number of roles. Safety is one of them, but our primary responsibilities take us to being with the kids, engaged with the kids during the day. So speaking to these school security officer roles, their main purpose and their focus is around entry of people into the building and access, and that kind of does too is take some of that off the plate of other school staff with other responsibilities, whether it's the secretaries or administrators or whoever else in the building. But I just wanted to comment, some people get confused on the school resource officer and school security officer differences, but that kind of explains it. We are actively engaged with the kids and the staff throughout the day, and this security officer position is solely around access into the building. So if anyone has any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer.
Question. So is it best practice to have a position for monitoring entrance into school buildings? You know, I'm looking beyond Vermont.
Sure.
Wide.
Yeah, I can speak from conferences and workshops that I go to with other officers from out of state. The majority of them do have school security officers as well as school resource officers. So they are part of the safety team, but there are many school districts who have those separate roles within the school. Yeah.
Kevin, you may not know the answer to this question, but I know, I think the police department, I've read in general, I don't know about South Burlington, that has had issues recruiting folks. Are these positions opportunities to bring people in through the police department and maybe have the school district contract through that, but become training roles that ultimately could be future school resource officers, for instance?
Yeah, I think right now where it's at is a lot of what kind of we're targeting or looking at for school security officers are people who already have experience in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So they're either retired law enforcement or military folks, people with some level of
It's the
training.
other end of the continuum.
Exactly, yeah. But there's nothing to say it couldn't be a younger person on the other end as well.
Mm-hmm. And based on your interaction at these conferences, are these positions typically armed positions?
It depends on the community and the state. Some states are starting to mandate that there's an armed security guard as well as school resource officers being separate from that. Other states and communities, it's whatever they're comfortable with and whatever works for them individually. So it's mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin, have you seen the job description, our specific one for the school security officers?
I have, yes.
And are you comfortable with it?
I am, yes. When district first started to explore this idea, they were in constant communication with us about kind of what to look for and what the job requirements would be. And, there's items in there such as, they're going to be involved in any student disciplinary action type things. Their main focus is, like I said, access into the building.
See, that was my one concern about one of the items that was in the job description was reporting to the administration behavioral issues with students. And that's where I was a little bit concerned that we would have potentially a relatively untrained, untested person, potentially with just a GED or high school equivalency and a little bit of training in a role with students and somehow involved in managing behavioral or disciplinary issues. And there was sort of that one line in the job description that bothered me just a little bit and seemed a little bit different than what you're saying.
Sure.
The role of an SSO would be versus an SRO.
Yeah, I think the intent of that is they would be like any other staff member in the building. If they see something that's inappropriate that a student's doing, they would pass it on to either an administrator or the school resource officer or someone else to deal with, instead of having that school security officer try to manage that situation by themselves. They would provide the information to someone else to follow up on.
Okay.
I do want to point out, by your place is this document that Gary, has put together, just to give you a little bit more detail on the safety and security qualifications. And Kevin, you don't have it right in front of you, but they may ask you a question or two about that, 'cause so in there, it kind of goes over, some of the requirements. Again, Gary kind of extrapolated this. I don't know, Gary, you can comment on.
It's from the National Association of School Resource Officers, and it covers what they will be trained on in the certification process as a school security officer. It kind of lends to what they will be responsible for in their day-to-day duties.
This is also the same organization that we send our new school resource officers to for training when they first come into our unit.
I mean, I think one of the bigger fallacies that I hear, at least from, folks within the administrative world, is school resource officers are kind of the security person. And I think, as Kevin indicated, I mean, one of the reasons I feel like that we have such a good situation is the relationships, because of the connectiveness that happens between our school resource officers. Again, elementary, and keeping those relationships all the way through. I mean, if you probably see a high school student, they're going to be able to call, Kevin, they know who it is. They call him Greeless, right, generally? And they, from young to old, they know them. And I think that's a testament to our school resource officers as they travel through. It's that relationship and not being tied up, at the door. If we need help, and we have asked for help, with parking, with, security, with, other things, they're there to respond. They always have been. But they're not there to be 100% at a location around the clock,
So just one other, as far as my understanding, the school safety officer, because they're not law enforcement, state law would have to change for them to be able to be armed
That's right.
on school property. So right now, the only individual who can be armed on school property are law enforcement, so I'm pretty sure that's correct.
Yeah,
So-
that is correct.
So it's not a decision for us to be making
Right.
here.
I think that
'cause we don't have
the
the
question could be whether an individual who occupies the job is a qualified and passed all of the requirements and has certification as a police officer, whether or not they could bear an arm, right? So that's where it gets probably wishy. But under the current job description, as we call it, they would not qualify. You're right, Martin.
And just to clarify, I just wanted to ask the question. I wasn't
No,
looking
no,
to
but, and I
influence
just
that
wanted to
one way or the other.
clarify that
Right.
if people want to encourage us to be using, arming these folks, we can. It's out of our hands
Right.
As a school
the
board
present time,
and
right.
administration, so.
So, David, Kevin pointed out that we'll have 3 SROs and a supervisor in FY19, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
So you're proposing there's one position that's in the budget, you're proposing
Two
two
additional.
additional, so
Mhm.
three incremental, well,
Two
two
incremental, yeah.
incremental positions, but
Mhm.
three total in addition to the, are they four full-time positions, the supervisor and the three SROs?
Right, so it would
In
become,
the
it
schools,
would
I
become a
should say.
total of three school resources, three school safety officers, three. We already have one in the budget, so it's an additional of incremental two. You're right that we have the school resource officers, the police department is increasing us for another one, so we'll have three school resource officers with a supervisor, and the supervisor's here, Dennis Ward. Thank you, Dennis, is the supervisor, and obviously he also will be in and around schools and doing the things that supervisor would be doing. So the incremental increase is another school resource officer, the request is the two additional school safety officers, and obviously this, although we had Dennis on board towards the end, last half year of last year.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Dennis Ward. I have almost 20 years with the department. I've done various jobs from detective to traffic safety, and now I have the opportunity to move into supervisory position as charge of the SROs. I started mid-April, so I've been on for like 2.5
Yeah.
months, 3 months, so trying to sort of get my feet wet and see what the school needs. I mean, Kevin's been an asset because he's been in the school such a long time. Andy Trainer just joined last year, so he's been on for 1.5 years, and we have Leanne Williamson, who's gonna be joining our team, this coming fall in the school, so it's a great team to work with, and you don't realize how fortunate you people are in South Burlington to have this team of players in your school to help your kids and make those connections, because the information provided, the information we get from students, the connections, invaluable. In times of crisis, invaluable. So, we're kind of lucky stars that we have these kind of officers in our schools to help us out.
Dennis, thank you. I think this board and our administration do
Oh,
realize
yeah.
how fortunate we are, and I think the community does as well. I think my questions are really around this SSO role is new to me, and I think to the board as of our last meeting. So it's really trying to understand the interface of that role with existing resources and the ability to differentiate the safety and security processes within the school as opposed to potentially investments in other hardening activities, which we've also made significant investments in through David's leadership and so forth. So I think that's where my questions are coming from, is really the advantage of having more FTEs that are in a different role, which sound like it's really, I don't want to diminish it, but it's really entry and access. Is that the best summary? I don't know who to look to for that answer.
No, I think
but-
that they're primarily going to be assigned to the entries of our schools around access. They will be an integral part of the team around our crisis teams, and will be integral in connecting with our school resource officers and the administrators. Again, right now, those roles are currently at the middle school, are handled by administrative assistants, and we did we're I think, pretty firm to get the governor's dollars for each school to upgrade, dollars that went towards our door entries to have the double door entries. And I think it's kind of coincidental that we're requesting double door entries pretty much across the state, but nobody's really talking about, how those are going to be, served and manned. We've again, I think, unfortunately, later than what we wanted, because it's not in this budget, but it has been part of our conversation about, what do we need to do, particularly after the Parkland issue and the feedback that we get from students. And so the SSOs, if you will, are, I think, the right approach. We definitely have been a district, we've had some security people, but they've been primarily individuals that have created relationships but didn't have the training. They certainly would be eligible to apply to these positions, but we think it's really important that they do go through the training and possess, the skills that we feel are really important. And we have filled one of the positions. They've interviewed a candidate who actually happens to be an ex-police officer with the South Burlington Police Department. That's for the position that we currently already have budgeted.
Well, I'll move to approve the addition of the two additional FTEs, the school security officers, safety officers, sorry.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, further discussion?
Yeah.
Alex?
Just a general question. So this is going to cost a little extra money. Where's it going to come from?
Well, you see in the FTE
Yeah.
side, I have some dollars there
Uh,
that are to savings. We have still some unfilled positions as a result of some retirees. Ed Darling retired, that was approved, I think, last meeting. So that replacement, which we're in the process, you'll see it on the 15th. There'll be some additional savings there on that fill as well. So again, I think, this is not what I'm wanting to do. I just, again, responsiveness to, our students whom we are educating and the staff that educate them and the community that entrusts their children to us is the reason.
So basically what I'm looking for is your assurance that we're going to be able to stay under budget or on budget by adding these two people. Are we going to, hire fewer people elsewhere? Or did we just luck out with people retiring so we can hire their replacements, which will be younger and at a lower salary? I need that kind of assurance.
Combination of both administratively this year, and again, I'll point to Joanne and some of the special ed work. There's been some reduction in some of the para-ed side. There was 5 reductions that were made to bring on some more specialized special ed services, so we've changed some headcounts there, and there's some savings there. That coupled with some of the other pieces, I do feel confident. It's never easy to predict the entire year and what might be forthcoming, but I do feel like this is sustainable.
Okay.
And my comment, the tough conversation is around FTEs, and, that is an ongoing commitment that for the first time in many years, we saw a reduction in total FTEs of 2.08 FTEs in the adopted budget last year over FY 17 and 18. And now the recommendation is to go back up to net 3.2 FTEs.
Right.
So directionally, that is a tough one from my perspective. Even though the net dollars on a budget standpoint would be covered, it is sort of setting the stage for FTEs, reversing a very modest reduction in FTEs that we realized last year, which was really the first time in a long time.
Yep.
My struggle with that is we know that districts and supervisory unions are under an incredible amount of pressure as it relates to staffing, and that some of the legislation that did not pass this year, but will come up, which is being evaluated, is really looking at student-staff ratios. And my concern with the budget votes that we've had over the past couple of years is we don't want to diminish the quality of instruction that we're also able to bring. And as it starts getting linked with FTEs, that will be a concern. I would also say, that is my concern. I also believe that I have to take your recommendations, David, and Gary, your recommendations, as well as our SROs, in terms of this specific FTE recommendation into account. Any other board comments?
Well, can I ask one more question? So let's suppose the school year starts and we find ourselves in the same spot we were a year ago, where there's a classroom somewhere that is much bigger than we thought, I think we have one contingent teacher left for that.
Yes.
So what happens if there's 2 classrooms that are oversized?
Administratively, that's back in my court, Alex,
Yeah.
around figuring out, where we are with funding, best service, reallocating resources, working with the administrators to figure out how we're gonna do that. We've typically, worked, I think, within the year with our staff, our teachers, administrators, to make that work. And we've not been, unless there's really, really profound number changes. And I think we've done a pretty good job on our homework. I've been pretty clear around volatility with kindergarten.
Yep.
We are a district, I think my colleagues around the state are seeing pretty significant decreases in enrollment, and therefore, they have some additional pressures when they're trying to do something like this. We don't have that same thing, albeit we aren't increasing significantly, but we're not going down significantly.
Yeah.
So, I would be looking to the administrators to provide recommendations without adding FTEs. I've worked hard to try to stay within the FTE account. At the same time, I do need to listen to the students, the staff, the parents, and the community about some of the things that are out in our unfortunate society that are affecting people. And I have to say that we've had some incidents that have left people pretty shaken.
Yeah.
Based on the incident that happened around the death threats, and then followed with the Parkland piece. It reactivated what I would say a high level of trauma for some people and students. And I have to make sure that we are making, instruction available to them without significant other stressors in their lives. And again, I don't know what the right end solution is. I do agree, Elizabeth, that I'd like not to be. I think when we look at FTE counts and allocations on the state level, I wonder, should these be in or out? Should these be out of those counts? Should those be excluded from those calculations because it's an expectation that's being kind of mandated by, safety and security, the governor, et cetera? I don't know. But
And I think the other component for me, David, is really, we've had conversations over the years about, sort of sticking to our knitting, and there's a lot of programs that
Or outside.
public schools have either become expected to offer or kind of become part of the mandate, including everything from food service to transportation to, any number of things. But I really do question our ability
To
to
do
really
those things well.
supervise the safety component. And I guess I would look to Dennis and you, Kevin, to really support the district in terms of the appropriate training and leadership. And it sounds like we have one candidate that could bring that to the table regardless. But, I think we have to be conscientious and cautious about the school's mission in terms of what expertise we bring and competency we bring to supervising a lot of different functions that might be out of our wheelhouse, too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any comments from the public? All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the 2 FTEs as recommended by administration for SSO positions. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes.
Great.
Thank you, thank you. Kevin and Dennis for your feedback as well.
Next on this, I know I need to move on a little bit quicker here. I apologize. Thank you, Kevin. Legislative update, we listed this at the last meeting. 2 areas that we wanted to focus on: education funding and some special ed education changes. I'll be fairly brief on education funding, although this was not a brief conversation during the last legislative session. There's been really no significant change as it ended for the upcoming year. So all of the same kind of metrics that have been in play in the past are going to be in play again. We do know that there's likely going to be some legislative activity for the upcoming years around how they're going to reconstruct or construct that in the future. But at the present time, it's pretty much the status quo.
Can I ask one quick question?
Mm-hmm.
What was, just for the public really, what was the impact on the tax rate of sort of where the legislature fell out, or what they can expect to see? I mean, I know tax bills are starting to go
No.
out because we've seen them, but,
I think the impact currently to taxpayers is better than what we indicated in I think most cases. I mean, the outcome, better than what we indicated. I don't know if anyone has any.
I thought it was my understanding that the tax rate, the average property tax rate in South Burlington will be going down like 2.5%.
Yeah, I didn't.
2.5 cents.
2.5
Yeah,
cents.
I did not, I'm not wanting to cite the specific amount,
It's around-
I think in
it's
general,
around
but,
that.
yeah, and again, there's some particular, maybe differences there, but it's in general a reduction from what was printed in our budget books.
Although we may have to make it up next year
Right.
because of one-time money.
So then next is just an update on special education. And again, I think a lot of you know that we've gone from a census, I mean, there's a census model which takes information. We used to be a block grant. There was a lot of questions that were happening. Are we going to go to an immediate block grant? And Joanne has put together a nice little bit of information for you, but she's also here to just kind of walk you through that. So Joanne, come on up.
So David asked me just to sort of summarize the change in the special ed funding that's going to get phased in, starting with FY 2021. And I broke it down in the little handout that I gave you because it's, Emily and I went through the act and we're like, wow. So we tried to make it as readable as possible for you. So for FY 2021, they're going to base it on our FY 17, 18, and 19, the average special ed revenue from the state increased by this economic index, which was a new one for us, and then divided by our long-term membership, and then by the number of kids that actually need, not just IEP students, but also 504, EST, ELL, and they also include kids who are reading below grade level. So we'll get this census model will take sort of our average spending, what's typically being used, and hopefully it'll be enough to cover all these needs that we have. And Amity and I are starting to run some of the numbers to see what it might look like. And then for FY 25, which is 3 years down the road, they're going to build this uniform-based amount, which I define below there too, taking FY 18, 19, and 20, including the block grant and the special ed expenditures reimbursement and exceptional circumstances, and then increase it by the NIPA again, and then average daily membership. So that's going to be what it will be ongoing, and then they're going to take 3 years, the FY 22, 23, and 24, to sort of graduate us from 21 to 25. So we'll have this build up, so it won't be so abrupt for a change for us. So that's their plan. The Act also is going to have an advisory group to help with the rules of implementation, which should be fun. And they're also going to study the weighting factors, because one of the things they're worried about is in any given year, could we have a number of really challenging, expensive students that come in that we have to support, and then it goes way above what we have in the census model. So they're going to do some study to look at that. They weren't sure what that was going to look like. So that's one thing they'll be looking at. And they're also looking at requiring us to improve our services, which thankfully we've been doing for the past few years, building our multi-tiered systems, building PBIS, putting in trauma-informed practices. The Act also talks a lot about that building that base of a general ed experience where all kids are supported, and then adding on the professional intervention for kids who need that. And then they'll have 3 new positions at the AOE to help support this. So that's basically a summary of 60 pages of an act in 1 page.
Question.
Yes.
So it was my understanding one of the selling points for this was that it would give schools more flexibility in how to use the funds for special education. Could you expand on that and tell me if that in fact is the case?
It's the
and how
case,
that's going to
yeah.
work?
One of the selling points, there were some really good selling points. One of them is it's going to because the reimbursement model sort of creates this incentive to identify kids on IEPs and categorize them and place them. So a census model like this will allow us to flexibly use those funds not only to support kids who are on individual education plans, but also kids who might be in need of some support services through our educational support system or on 504 plans. So we could use this census grant money to support all different kids of need. So right now, we have to, and Amity knows about this, with the special ed reimbursement model, we have to document everything that we do as special educators and write down who we're working with and how long we worked with them. It's administratively costly just to document all that, but it has to follow all those rules. It's going to be much more flexible because we're using a census, so we'll be able to use that money more flexibly. We still have to follow the law, and those IEPs kids are still going to be entitled to those services because of their disability, but we'll have an ability to flexibly use it. So a special educator could work with a group of students. Some of them might be on IEPs and might not be, and we don't have to document every single thing that we're doing.
Right.
It's a much better alignment with our multi-tiered systems than the old model of funding. It's also more predictable. It's more transparent. There's a lot in favor of moving to a census model, and I've always been, it's some of the work that I've done with my association to try and get this move forward. And the study that they did at UVM was really well done. So I think it's a good move for students in general. I don't know about the actual money part of it. That's the one thing that we haven't quite been able to figure out. Like, will we have enough to do with what we're doing, or how will it fund it? And how will it transition? Yeah, and
There seemed to be an expectation with the legislation that the costs would go down. Where is that expectation driven from?
well, I think that they're looking at not identifying kids with needs. So there's that sort of incentive to, when you're getting reimbursed for kids who are on IEPs and you want to identify more kids on IEPs, you want to create more kids with needs. So you're identifying them because you're going to get this reimbursement for it. So it does away with that. So it should decrease costs. Also, the Act is instructing us to build that base, that universal instruction, so that all classroom teachers really have the knowledge and skills to work with the variety of children that I talk about all the time. And that on top of that, we use highly skilled educators to provide an additional dose of instruction, whether that be behaviorally or academically. One of the things that the study talked about, and I think the FTE issue that you talk about a lot, is that we have a lot of paraeducators working with kids, and it would shifting that model to having these special education paraeducators and hiring more reading instructors and special educators so that we can have students working with highly skilled instructors rather than just supported by a paraeducator so that they can access their learning. It's just sort of a shift in that, and that should be, in the long run, and I think I've talked about this before, in the long run, it's going to build a system that's going to be more sustainable and less expensive. That's the whole idea. And also not identifying kids. I mean, I think identifying kids for special education can be a detriment to students. So we want to serve them where they're at always, meet them right where they're at, so that they can get a good education and not have to have a label.
Great.
Any other board questions? All right.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne. So next is what we amended was to consider the request from the Grand Isle board to add one additional student. Here's a email from their now interim superintendent. And basically, what I received from him was that, I'll just quickly paraphrase, obviously appreciates the South Burlington School Board willingness to even look at this. This is particular for the 7th grade students. Grand Isle Board received 7 requests for 7th grade students who wish to attend South Burlington. This would be an increase of 1. In their discussion Monday night, the Grand Isle Board members expressed that they wanted to make sure the process was equitable for all students. And so in the end here, they're simply saying that, they're just really trying to be equitable. So if you aren't able to approve the one additional, they want to be equitable and essentially say it's not an available option. We initially, I'd sent it at 10. That kind of brought the seventh grade up to a maximum. You had it at the July 11th board meeting, you approved 6. So this request, which I know is not on the agenda, and it's late coming, so I apologize for that. That said, they've been making some, last-minute procedural processes as well, and again, they have confirmed 7. So my request would be to approve the one additional student from Grand Isle for 7th grade participation here at the Frederick H. Tuttle Middle School.
So one question I have, David, if this is an all or nothing request, are the other schools that are participating in this able to pick up the other 7 students?
No,
So what happens then?
they would continue their education at the Grand Isle School in 7th grade.
I thought Colchester said they would take them.
Again, I don't exactly know where the other schools are. I don't know what they would do. I just know that I don't believe that those have been options, for this particular group. I think this 7 would go back to Grand Isle School. Which, remember, that was part of the Act 46 merger plan, was that, but part of the request here is to limit the transitions for a student 7th grade, 8th grade off to a high school. So the request from them is, and again, I think this was as I said before, not to repeat, but it was a flaw in the Act 46 merger language to allow for some of these types of transitions.
Where do we stand with South Burlington enrollment?
So we're right at where I was before. We've had no changes. I have not gotten an update on the kindergarten fluctuations as of recent. I will tomorrow from the administrators. But that doesn't affect these. These are, again, this 7th grade class next year is fairly sizable. But when I did the math, essentially, 10 would bring them right up to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't had any additions to that particular grade level. It tends to be pretty static for us. We get some 1 or 2 in, but we also get 1 or 2 out. It tends to be pretty static as we see from middle school through high school, migration stays pretty much the same, or static.
David, remind me, the thinking then would be that as these students transition to 8th grade, if they also came to Tuttle for 8th grade, that would give Grand Isle ample time to budget for full tuition,
That's
not
correct.
just the 4,000. Okay.
That's correct. And again, I think, primarily it's based on the transitions for children, 1. 2, I do think it plays into our favor around viability for, these then 7 kids will likely, I think, have a good experience here in 7th grade, and I think they'll want to stay on in 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
That will be obviously budgeted at full tuition. And I think if that's true, then I think they'll likely stay for 4 more years into the high school and join other of their classmates that will come over or have come over, as well. So.
And I think you covered this in your earlier request, but we also already run the buses.
We do already run the buses. The buses currently do have capacity for the 7 additional students. And there would be no additions as a result of this number, yeah.
Question for you, David. So let's suppose this doesn't happen and none of the kids can come to South Burlington. So they would just go to Grand Isle School for 7th grade, and then they would be tuitioned at 8th grade. So basically what
Somewhere.
Yeah, or somewhere.
Yep.
So basically what this does is it moves their transition from their on-island school to their middle school, which is off-island, that's how they call it. It just basically moves it up a year.
That's right.
So there's
Cuts
no,
it down by 1 year.
excuse me?
It allows them to really gel into a 7th and 8th grade,
Yeah,
2-year experience at, in our case, a middle school.
Yep.
As opposed to coming as an 8th grader. And those transitions can be hard when you walk into an already formed population that has mixed, you know? And in our case, that's what happens, right? They come to us at 6, and they're melding between 3 of our elementary schools. And, you know, it's not easy to join 1 year later, you know, but the groups, absolutely, and they move to different teams, but nonetheless, it's an experience that we're looking at. Oh, your microphone.
So can I put Gary on the spot and ask you to change your hat for a minute?
Come on up, Gary.
I have a different shirt in the car.
And just get your take on this from your perspective.
Okay, so I'll be completely transparent. We've been working on this issue as a board since Act 46 passed, about 16 months. We identified the problem shortly after Act 46 passed and have been working with superintendents through our former superintendent, Don Van Ostren, for quite a while. South Burlington at this point is the only school with capacity to potentially support this 7th grade class. There were 7 formal requests. We asked for formal in writing requests, and we did set a deadline so no more kids could request. Sent certified mail to all families, and 4 kids selected or requested Essex, 2 requested Colchester, and 7 requested South Burlington. Colchester and Essex are over their policy for 7th grade class size. So those students, we knew that prior to Monday's meeting. We knew that in the letter, and we gave parents the option to request what was left, and 7 of them did and requested South Burlington. I can't speak for the board. I'm the chair, but I would not speak for them in public. But I think it's unlikely that we would tuition anyone if we couldn't provide equity for the people that asked to be tuitioned to South Burlington.
So does that mean there are some students who requested to be tuitioned to other schools that won't be going because of capacity issues?
It does.
So how does, can I just ask, how does that address the equity issue?
Okay, we did address that with all those families, and they supported not sacrificing the opportunity for the kids who where there was capacity at their choice school, and we've done that over 2 subsequent meetings. Because
So to be clear, there were 13 students that wanted to
There
tuition
were.
someplace.
There-
7 of them were South Burlington
Correct.
choice students. Okay.
correct. And you know, I do know there are a couple of families that are going to pay tuition to go to their school choice, school of choice. Because, I mean, it's really, from our perspective and in talking to experts and superintendents, it's the connected curriculum piece that's most important to most families. South Burlington loops, Essex loops, and those high school preparatory curriculums back-to-back in 7th and 8th grade and how they're connected is really the foundation that most families are looking for. Grand Isle's curriculum is not poor, but it's different and it's connected in different ways than the receiving schools. And I think one of the other issues that the board thought was important was the aspect of transitioning twice in 2 consecutive years. In effect, 3 different physical locations in 3 consecutive school years is what we looked at. And it wasn't without some contention. I'll be completely transparent there. But the board has voted to authorize the tuition agreement with South Burlington. And we do have a tuition agreement with Colchester. They just ran out of capacity.
Any other board questions? Does this require action, David?
Yes, I would like it. I mean, it's one additional student. I would like it to be reflected as an action by the board.
So do we have a motion to approve an incremental seventh grader from Grand Isle?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion?
Can I just, I think, yes, I think Grand Isle has about 16 or 17 seventh graders. So it sounds like they're seventh grade. Is that about right?
It's 21.
21. So their seventh grade class is going to be less than 10 this coming year, isn't it?
It would be 13 or 14.
13,
If you approve.
if we approve. Yeah.
Well, no, because if two students decide to pay tuition.
Yep.
It would be 11, which the class was split, so they had 11 and 10 in their split last year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That doesn't affect my vote. It's just curious.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to give you the right numbers.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8, consider tax anticipation note, and this is warned for action.
Yep, this is not atypical. In the past, we have, in fairness, we haven't had to exercise this a lot because we've usually had cash on hand to cover. But obviously, when funds are tight, before we get revenue in from the city, we have to do a tax anticipation note. So what you have before you is the request, and I know Amity has worked on this, and she's here with us tonight, too, if you have any particular questions. But again, this is a tax anticipation note to bridge the payroll. Anything to add, Amity? No.
Maybe just a question, it says, inception there is August 6th, and loan documents will be available for the board prior to closing. Does that mean this meeting?
Actually, it would be after tonight, so I should have documents tomorrow.
Okay.
And it wouldn't require all board members, it would just require probably the clerk if that's
Okay.
who you appoint.
That's fine.
Any further discussion? Do I-
Send the bill to Martin for like $4,200 of interest? or-
Do we have a motion to
General Assembly.
approve the tax anticipation note in the amount of $2.5 million with Community Bank?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item 9, master planning and visioning.
So, a couple quick things. August 13th is a reminder that they're doing sound testing at Chamberlain. This is where they actually come with devices and put them outside, and they are going to do the measurements between inside, outside, and look for the appropriate change. That still is moving forward. I have heard, continued to be affirmed that our grant is going to be approved for the soundproofing. I haven't actually seen the actual delivered documents, but I'm hearing that it's going to be approved, so that's a positive. And I'll continue to keep the board up to date on that. I know there is an upcoming meeting that Steve indicated last meeting, and that date is, I can't recall, but there is a technical advisory, I don't think they're calling it technical advisory meeting anymore. I forget the transition, but I know that both you and I were invited.
That I was holding on my calendar, and then they scheduled it 3 weeks later that I have a conflict.
Yeah, so I certainly, I think I can cover that.
Okay,
But
good.
is it still technical advisory committee or
I'd have
something of
to
that
find
nature?
the
Yeah.
email. I think it's just a.
So nonetheless, they're back in the queue, but part of that was as a result of, they needed the delay because they're going to move forward with the environmental, sound study, sound mapping. I'm not drawing-
NEMS, noise
that,
exposure maps.
Yeah, noise exposure maps, right, NEMs. So anyway, that's where we are with the Chamberlain School. As far as the committee work related to master planning and visioning, I want to just thank board members for making time with both myself and John Stewart. We have gathered your information. We appreciate that. We'll be putting that together. This particular phase is asking for some support for Phase 2. Phase 2 is looking at the instructional methodologies that we want to have our facilities support. I know Bridget has expressed, at least we've kind of strong-arm her a little bit whether she'd be interested. We would be happy to have another board member, but the point of this would be as a committee made up of one or two board members would be part of interviewing the architects. We have 4 architects that submitted bids for both Phase 1 and 2, and we would be interviewing them to look at applicability for Phase 2. So I think Bridget's on board for that. If somebody else wants to join on, you can let myself, Delina, know if you're interested. We've captured about 3 dates, so they're pretty quick. One date's next week, and then there's a couple the following week.
I guess I'm out then, sorry.
But if you want, we can query when we know if that works. We'll let the other board members
Do we have
know.
other folks on that interview group?
Yes, we do, yep. We are going to have representation, from each of the schools administratively, so we'll have a good representation. And again, the point here is to look at who's going to best serve Phase 2. We hope it's maybe one of them, but we're going to do our due diligence in that regard. So that's all I have, master planning.
Great. Any other comments on master planning?
Getting almost caught up.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item 10, Vermont School Board Association resolutions. Martin.
So,
Sorry, Martin.
All right, so.
Can't help you much.
So I happen to be on the committee of the Vermont School Board Association Board that took up resolutions. And they really pushed to try to get a lot of resolutions this year. Last year, we had no resolutions that were offered by school boards. This year, we had 21. And it was actually, it was a well-run meeting. It was, so that committee made initial suggestions. There's a meeting of the board on the 8th of August, and they will vote on what ones they're going to, all those can go to the whole body in October in the annual meeting, but they'll either go with a support from the Vermont School Board Association Board or not support or no position. And that's what's going to be decided on the 8th. So that's an update on there. The question is for you all, if there was anything else. I think it was pretty comprehensive as far as issues that we've talked about and been concerned about that were included in these 21. And besides, we're a little too late unless we wanted to submit a resolution proposal
At the meeting?
At the meeting, or we could even send it in advance. But I mean, I looked through and I couldn't come up with any particular thing that's not already in the resolutions that VSBA has or are being brought up in these
Is it,
multiple other resolutions.
are the 21 that were submitted, are those available to us as members?
They will be. I mean, they will be, because unless if the board says no, or we don't think this should be advanced, it'll still come before everybody on the October meeting unless the originating school board decides to withdraw it.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I'd be interested to see what was submitted in aggregate so that if something isn't supported by the board subcommittee,
Right.
and this board felt strongly, we might consider doing the work to get it at the October meeting.
Sure. I would suggest waiting until the full VSBA board meets on the 8th and see what they come up with. I will be out of town. I won't be there for that, but we can find out there afterwards.
Great.
Yeah, so.
I have some comments on that, and I think this might be because my kids are starting to get older and starting to look and act like adults. But I've started to become more outspoken in the tobacco age, and things such as hearing our high school principal say he'd like to strangle the person that invented vaping, and the more research that I've done and learned about it, the more and more it bothers me that this pipeline, or whatever you want to call it, of smoking products is available to our high school kids and is getting down to the kids that it's not supposed to be available to just because of their connection with older high school kids. And I feel like this is something where we need to step up, even though it doesn't immediately appear to be school board regular business. This is something that affects our kids. It's something that affects our outcomes. And I think we need to take a position on it.
Was there anything in the resolutions?
I don't think there was one. I have last year's list of resolutions. I don't recall if there's one already in there or not, as far as the resolutions. And essentially what the resolution does, just to give a little more background on it, is it's an instruction to the director of the VSBA on what they should be doing as far as taking positions on issues either before the Agency of Education, the legislature, or the agency, or the school, or the state board of education. So that's the purpose, is to provide direction. And there may be something already in here as far as safety. I don't know if it's specifically targeting as far as cigarettes. I can take a look, and we can, or you can take a look. It's online and see if there's a resolution that might fit in, and if you want to have us propose one, we should bring that up in one of the next couple meetings. Would be my suggestion.
All right. Well, if there's interest in this board, I'm interested in pushing for it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, speaking for myself, Alex, I would be looking for our administration to make a recommendation in that regard, just in terms of what the effectiveness, and possibly as part of a legislative agenda, for instance.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to setting the agenda for August 15th.
So I know we need to add potentially city warning on the language related to, I don't know what we're calling it, land conveyance and 575. And to be clear with folks that are listening, this is between the land conveyance of some property at Rick Marcotte in exchange for the 575 Dorset. So we know that we need to have some language that we would approve or not related to that warning. We'll get the specific wording on that. I just wanted to make sure we're clear.
It might be good for that meeting. I know it came up
Yep.
on education funding, the question of the actual tax impact over the approved budget. If we could actually have that available.
Yeah, so I think in 7, it may, right, Delina? I'm putting you on the spot. That's from David, right? Our attorney, specific to that land exchange. And so,
Well, I'm sorry. I'm looking for the education funding component.
oh, I got you.
From your superintendent's report, so maybe
Over
just
there.
a sub-point on education funding again under your
Okay.
report
Mm-hmm.
to get the actual tax impact.
Yeah, gotcha. Sorry, I wasn't.
That's okay.
So we had just promised the community member an update on the time availability
Right.
protocol.
Mhm.
And then you and I had talked about
Yes,
more
future.
discussion about PBGRs, and I don't know if this is the appropriate meeting or if it's another one, but sometime soon, I think we should discuss it.
Yeah, I think we should just add it to future agenda items, as much as I don't want to do that, but just so it doesn't get lost. I did, in the high school, administrators are happy to do that. I'll touch base with them tomorrow about it. I know that, there's been a fair amount of communication, but just to be transparent, there's some activity going on in other states that are calling on the effectiveness of PBGRs, and some people are starting to say, is Vermont going to let go of them too? And so there's a lot of, I think, discussion. And so Bridget had brought that up to me the other day, and
Mostly, there's just a lot of discussion in the community, and despite the fact that the students did what sounds like a great presentation that I couldn't attend at the high school, and despite Pat Burke's article, there's just still been a lot of questions, and we had a question through the board Facebook page, and then there's a lot of discussion on the community watch page about PBGRs and people's concerns about them. And I just had said to David, it would be helpful if we could just get a clarification, sort of update for the board and for the public who
Yep,
attend the board
future
meetings and watch them.
expectations, yep.
So that we're just clear about exactly what the policy is and how it's implemented and how it's different from some of these ones that have had challenges.
Yeah, David? I probably heard the same concerns that Bridget's been hearing from, the Community Watch Facebook page and from maybe some other community members, but, these people are pretty well plugged in and they follow us and they follow education pretty closely and they're still confused about it. So I sort of had imagine that maybe we could have something like a good, put the slide projector up over there or something like that and have
Walk them through.
20, 30 minutes, well, maybe not that much time, to talk about PBGRs, because that's what people are asking about, and they feel like we're not communicating well with the public. And, Bridget's absolutely right. I think you said it a little bit better.
Yep.
But so I guess I can,
Got it. Yep.
lend some.
So I'll work that into a future thing, and I think we can,
Yep.
probably should be more than just a board update. We can also,
Yeah.
I'll update you on how the high school and middle school are communicating it both to staff, students, and parents.
Yeah, I think something that is, more suited for the general public rather than just us or so on. Kind of like what we do with the budget presentation. Everybody can look at it. It's meant for everybody, and it's meant to be easily understood. I think that would go a long way with getting goodwill or earning goodwill from the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
So a couple quick things. On the condom distribution, if you could see if Patrick Burke can respond to the issues that this gentleman raised.
I got it.
I figured you would, but just
Yeah.
to make clear, don't want just a general presentation.
Yeah,
I'd
the
like
specific to
just
the
kind of a
law,
response
the
to this.
law reference that he made,
Yeah, that was kind of.
close in age
interesting.
law, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not
so-
familiar with that extremely well, but,
And I don't know, I would like to just add a quick bullet point on, for the board, we've got the other paper article schedule in front of you, and would just draw people's attention to the next 3 dates that Alex, Bridget, and Steve and Bridget are signed up for. Is that right?
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
I see it right here.
So if we can put it on an agenda item to start filling in the next upcoming dates. And then the other thing that's just kind of top of mind would be backfilling our junior student representative. And I know it's a little bit premature, but that process hopefully could start right at the start of the school year. And we'd get somebody on board in advance of budget discussions.
and is there a couple of board members that I know, I think it was you and Bridget that were kind of
I'm happy
helping to do that?
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it'd be great if we're having interviews, right, but it was really probably a nudge to
Yeah.
Pat Burke and
To get
and
it
to
right at
Arnell
day
to
one.
start the actual application process and all
Mhm.
that stuff.
Anything else for the August 15th agenda? All right. Moving on to agenda item 12, future agenda items. We've already added the PBGRs to that. Anything else? All right, consider the minutes of the July 11th meeting. Any comments or questions? I did want to make one quick correction on the, consider request from Grand Isle. I think this was indicated that it was, all were in favor on the roll call vote, and that was a majority. The motion passed by majority. Just to be clear on that. Any other comments or corrections on the July 11th meeting? All right. right, seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. And do we need to take the bid off because
Yeah,
of those
you should.
corrections?
Mhm.
So we'll take the bid off. And do you want to go ahead and just review the hire?
Yep, so you've got,
Oh, sorry, Steve. I didn't vote.
You didn't vote, okay, okay. All right, sorry.
So let's hold off on that, back to that, because there's other places where was all were in favor. That, I mean, is it just understood when it's a roll call vote that people who vote voted yes? Or do we need to change,
That is a good
or do
question.
we need to change how, because this is not the only place where we have all in the favor. It's every place else where we have the roll call vote, where we all were in favor.
Or the contingency teacher.
When I looked at that, I believed, my recollection
Is that-
was that the other areas were correct.
So
Mhm.
at the top
Motion
of
failed.
page 2. But I think the question is whether it's proper to say, if a roll call vote was taken and the 4 people who vote, because the
Actually-
chair does not vote unless there's a tiebreaker,
Oh,
which
gotcha.
you did
Yeah,
in the
that's
one.
true.
You did
That
it
is
in the
true.
one.
So we'll just
So-
take out all were in favor in every case. And just say roll call was taken and the motion passed. That would be accurate, correct?
or are you thinking we need to list everyone?
Well, it's just, I mean, there's a, yeah, that may be fine,
I think
actually.
it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we may want to just double check that. The purpose of the roll call is just to make sure that,
Each are
Excellent.
heard, right? Have access.
yeah, that each are heard, so, right.
Okay,
Got that.
Okay.
all right. Okay, the new hire?
Yep, so 1.0 special ed at the high school. And you do have a new hire report in your packet as well.
I think there was some information that we were going to be updated on that one
Yep.
relative to budget.
That's right, that's true. And so it said would be provided at the board meeting. So currently it's salary of 56,057. This is in part of the reduction of the 5 paraeducators
Mhm.
at the high school. And so when you net out the 5 paras positions, it's $101,000, 579, and then obviously the 56, so that's what would be
So that would
there.
show up under the budgeted.
That's right,
Okay,
okay?
all right. So we'll move on to the
Yes,
lease.
so we'll move on to the bids, and I'm just gonna let Gary's been working on this since he's been onboarded, or on board, either one. And I'll just let him explain kind of the
This will
process.
take a minute. It's not as complex as it seems, but it's almost impossible to describe. So it'll take a second to hand these out because they're a bunch of separate documents. The first document are the changes that are happening. Actually, you can take one of those and pass it the rest around.
I can help you, Gary, too.
Take one of those and pass the rest around. Take one of those and pass the rest around. Okay, once everybody has them, I will start. So again, not a complex situation. The bottom line is there are some language changes in the resolutions that were passed on June 6th and June 21st. It came to light because an equipment bid for 6th grade Dell computers came to my attention, and our team in the business office handled it very well, but it was outside the normal lease process. When we looked at it, the interest rate was considerably higher than than our MLC leases for the resolutions that you had already passed. So we got to look at how the process happened and realized that it hadn't come through the business office. So we reevaluated, we collaborated with the person who requested the equipment, with the section that requested it, and decided to not have David sign off on that separately, but to combine it with the MLC lease. So we had to send that to Bob Fletcher for legal review. He came back with some concerns about the way the language was written. And during that process, as we were evaluating it, and I was evaluating it, it came to light that Bob hadn't reviewed the resolutions that you had signed on the 6th and the 21st of June. So we had him do the work to evaluate the language in those resolutions. And the changes are listed. We summarized those today. So in all three of the, now you have 3 separate resolutions to include the Dell computer one for $78,000. All references to the governing body are revised to read Board of School Directors. In section 2, each section 2, the paragraph has been reordered, and Board of School Directors and its duly warned meeting has been added, or at its duly warned meeting has been added. And in section 3, of the lessee, be and each of them hereby was removed from that first sentence. So that came from the legal review. So the recommendation in talking with Bob Fletcher, David has the proposed language that Bob and I worked out today to be able to correct that. Not great that it happened, but I hope it instills confidence that our team has got your back, and we will look out for your interests.
Question, so we've approved these amounts already once before?
Not the 6th grade one.
Not the
Oh, the
sixth
6th,
grade.
okay, right.
Not the one that's before you tonight, but the previous 2 were.
All 3 have to
Oh,
be.
that's right. Yeah, all 3 now
Oh, okay.
need to be
This
because
is
of the
the-
language
this
change.
is
Mhm.
the 6th grade.
And these are all in the budget?
They are, yes. The requested computers were in the budget for this year. They were just requested separately at over 1% higher interest rate in the lease that they had negotiated. So we
So
reevaluated
two
it.
questions that are a little bit more maybe process and policy related, maybe actually kind of separate of the approvals, but one is, and I guess I don't need to know the details, but do we have processes in place that all equipment purchases go through the business office?
We do.
Okay. And the second one was the legal review of the resolutions that come to the board.
Routine.
Is there a policy that the board should be reviewing that we were out of compliance with that?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean,
I can look at it.
it's more of a, I mean, this was a process question, I think. It was in transition, and I think it was believed that we did get the legal review. And I don't want to, pin John Aubin down, but, I was under the impression that had been done. I think on a going forward
Yeah,
basis.
I think the basic question I would have is there a policy? I think Gary, you're right, it's a follow-up
Yeah.
question of, is there a policy that we would have been out of compliance with in that regard? I
Right, and we
think
can
would be
look-
helpful to know.
And we would report it appropriately when we monitor, when we come to that monitoring component, yeah. So the language that's recommended would be to move, to override the resolution adopted on June 21st, 2018, and replace them with the resolutions presented forthwith, which are before you tonight.
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion passes.
Great. Thank you, Gary.
Any comments or questions on AP orders 1 and 2? Oh, we're back at 1 and 2. Right, seeing none. Oh, go ahead.
So the big item on number 2 First of all, I assume that you're confident 288 is the right number?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And most of that is something, I think it was a computer lease, but it also says, where did I see it, where it says FY16 lease on it? Was this a multi-year lease? It was?
So we do multi-year leases, 4-year leases, and so that is part of that 4-year lease that started in 2004.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
And a quick process question, do we adjourn the public session and then re-adjourn an executive session?
I don't think we need to adjourn, we just will go into executive session. We can adjourn from executive session.
Okay, so, and do I?
All sorts of problems.
I know. So we don't need a motion to
Go into
do that. All right, so we will go into executive session now
For the purposes of.
for the purposes of discussion of labor negotiations and a personnel matter.